Imagine, just for a second, that you own the absolute ultimate product. I'm talking about something so universally needed, so perfectly executed, that it literally prints money for your company day in, day out. But there's a massive catch. You know the exact day, down to the literal minute, that your product is doomed. Well, this is the story of how Pfizer milked a $131 billion cow, knew exactly when it would die, and still couldn't save it. Welcome to this explainer on the epic rise and fall of the undisputed king of drugs, Lipitor.
Okay, let's dive into this. $131 billion. That is the lifetime sales figure for Lipitor, which is an anti-cholesterol statin that launched way back in 1997. And get this, over $125 billion of that was raked in before its patent even expired. It is, by literally every metric we have, the best-selling drug in history. This was the ultimate cash cow. It's the kind of product that doesn't just boast earnings, it defines an entire era of a business.
But you know, immense success creates immense vulnerability. At its absolute peak in 2006, Lipitor was bringing in $12.9 billion globally. When you look at the revenue breakdown, that one single pill accounted for a staggering 27% of Pfizer's total revenue. Think about how terrifying that actually is from a business perspective. More than a quarter of a massive global pharmaceutical giant's income was entirely dependent on a single chemical compound. No pressure, right?
And to be totally fair to them, they earned that market share. Lipitor wasn't just some clever marketing trick. Pfizer didn't even invent this class of drugs. They were actually fifth to market. But what they did do was build this completely impenetrable clinical moat. They ran over 400 clinical trials involving roughly 80,000 patients. So they didn't just prove it lowered cholesterol, they went out and proved it actually prevented heart attacks and strokes. The data collection and the sheer execution were just unprecedented.
Section 1. The ticking patent clock.
Let's move to the timeline and see how this builds, because Pfizer didn't just sit back and watch the clock tick down. Oh no, they frantically played the legal delay game. In 2003, they sued the generic manufacturer Ranbaxy. Then by 2008, they reached a settlement that legally delayed the generic launch until November 30th, 2011. In January 2009, they bought Wyeth. All of this, every single move, was marching toward that fateful day in 2011, Patent Cliff Day. Now those legal battles, they bought them an extra 18 months of exclusivity, which translates to tens of billions in extra sales. But at the end of the day, litigation only buys time. It doesn't actually stop the cliff.
So, to really understand the stakes here, we need to define what a patent cliff actually means. In the industry, they call it loss of exclusivity, or LOE for short. It's the exact moment a drug's patent protection legally evaporates. Basically, overnight, generic competitors are allowed to enter the market with the exact same chemical compound. And when they do, it completely craters the price and vaporizes the original creator's monopoly. Just boom, gone.
Section 2. Pfizer's Epic Defense Playbook. Facing down literally the biggest loss of exclusivity in human history, Pfizer decided, hey, we aren't going down without a fight. They built an absolute fortress around their cash cow using 4 genius steps. First, an authorized generic deal. Second, aggressive insurance rebates. Third, a direct-to-patient bypass program. And fourth, massive preemptive diversification. Let's break down exactly how brilliant this playbook really was.
Step 1. If you know 90% of your sales are going to vanish to generics, well, why not just own the generic? Pfizer did something totally unprecedented here. They partnered with Watson Pharmaceuticals. Pfizer actually manufactured and supplied their own generic version of Lipitor and let Watson distribute it. So think about that. Even when a patient switched to the generic option, Pfizer was still quietly taking a massive cut of the revenue. It's brilliant.
Now, what's really interesting about this next move is their Lipitor for You program. Under this, Pfizer offered insured patients branded Lipitor for just $4 a month, complete with free home delivery. Meanwhile, the generic copay was $10. Let that sink in. Pfizer actively made the premium brand-name drug cheaper out of pocket than the generic copycat, and by delivering it directly to your home, they bypassed the local pharmacy counter entirely. And that is huge, because the pharmacy counter is the exact spot where pharmacists usually auto-substitute your brand-name prescription for a generic one.
And incredibly, you guys, these aggressive tactics actually worked. If you look at the results during that first 180-day window after the patent expired, the numbers are wild. Typically, a drug keeps about 15% of its market share right after losing exclusivity, and the profit drops to near zero. But Pfizer, they kept around 40% of their market share, and they were still making about $100 in profit per 90-day supply. They slowed the bleeding better than anyone in the industry ever thought was possible.
But remember step 4 of their playbook? Diversification.
In 2009, which was 2 years before the cliff, Pfizer bought their rival Wyeth for $68 billion in cash and stock. I just want to let the absolute absurdity of that number sink in for a second. $68 billion. By doing this, Pfizer essentially admitted that Lipitor was so huge it was entirely irreplaceable. So they spent $68 billion to buy their way into biologics and vaccines, effectively trying to build a brand new mountain before they fell off the cliff.
Section 3. The inevitable fall, or gravity wins. Because, as this quote perfectly summarizes, the average brand-name drug loses 80 to 90% of its volume within 6 months. It's an unstoppable market force. When you go to your local CVS or Walgreens, U.S. law allows and insurance companies demand that pharmacists automatically substitute the cheaper generic. Now, Pfizer delayed this mechanism brilliantly, as we saw, but they couldn't break it forever. The 180-day exclusivity window eventually closed in May 2012, and the inevitable fall finally began.
And this brilliantly illustrates the reality of a patent cliff. It is an absolute gut punch. On one side, you have peak Lipitor revenue at $12.9 billion. On the other, Q1 2012 revenue, just $383 million. I mean, wow, all that market dominance, all those billions of dollars, functionally evaporated in a matter of months once the full wave of generics flooded in. The statistics here are just staggering. Week 1, a 50% sales plunge immediately. By the fourth quarter of 2012, U.S. sales were down an astonishing 91%. And over the full year from 2011 to 2012, worldwide revenues fell 59%, dropping from $9.5 billion all the way down to $3.9 billion. It turns out even the greatest corporate defense in history couldn't stop the financial gravity of losing a monopoly.
Section 4. Changing Pharma Forever.
So, what does this all mean? The sheer scale of Lipitor's collapse sent massive shockwaves through the corporate world. Because it wasn't just a bad quarter for Pfizer. It was a fundamental shift that changed how the entire pharmaceutical industry operates to this very day. What Pfizer ultimately proved to everyone is that you simply cannot replace a $13 billion a year product using your own internal R&D labs. Lipitor's sheer size was its own curse. It was just too massive. You can't just mandate your scientists to go out and invent another best-selling drug in human history to cover the upcoming losses. It just doesn't work that way.
So the crucial point is this. The strategy is not to prevent the cliff, but to build the next mountain before you fall off. You can hire all the lawyers in the world, you can launch the most clever rebate programs ever conceived, but that patent cliff is eventually going to take your product. Your only true survival strategy is buying or building entirely new revenue streams before the clock runs out.
And that painful, expensive lesson is exactly why the industry looks the way it does today. If you've ever wondered why big pharma companies are constantly acquiring 1 or 2 small biotech startups every single year, this is why. The Lipitor cliff completely shifted the entire business model away from relying purely on internal discovery toward a model of endless, frantic acquisitions just to outrun their own expiring patents. Which leaves us looking at the modern state of medicine and corporate strategy with a pretty heavy realization. Pfizer milked a $131 billion cow, they deployed literally every genius trick in the book, and they still couldn't save it. So it really begs the question, with companies now relying on buying out smaller startups just to survive their own patent cliffs, is the era of the massive, internally developed blockbuster drug completely dead? It's definitely something to think about the next time you pick up a prescription. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and remember to keep questioning what's behind the curtain.